Hi, I'm John Little, and this is the ShockCast for July 28th, 2018. Why war might begin next month. Orders from Riyadh. The war of words over the past week and weeks between the US and Iran moved up a notch in a very, very big way. And I originally thought that this was just rhetoric, until I realized that the cause was a little reported incident in the Red Sea that happened on Wednesday. The Iran-backed Houthi rebels attempted and almost succeeded to sink two Saudi oil tankers. And it appears that Saudi Arabia might have very quietly activated an agreement with the US to protect Saudi Arabia from Iran. That, my friends, means war. I hope that you'll be ready for this. I was going to write about something else until I realized just moments ago that there was something far more important for you to think about. Poor Shmuel Ziegelboim will need to be talked about on another day. If you have been an Omega Shock reader for long enough, you know that the Petrodollar system is vital to American power. In fact, it is the foundation of the American empire. Without the Petrodollar system, the United States goes back to being a normal country like any other, and the power-mad kleptocrats of Washington, D.C. would never allow that to happen. They value their power, wealth, and prestige above all else. Never stand between a psychopath and the power that he seeks. Never. Unfortunately, the petrodollar system is complicated and so classified that no one in the US government can ever be allowed to even hint at it. Yes, you can see the system in action, but it can never be officially acknowledged. Never. I wrote about this 4 years ago, and it's even more true today than it was then. So let me read what I wrote back then. So turn back time to June 24th or June 23rd, 2014. First article was World War III, Syria was the beginning, June 23rd, 2014. As a kid, I was fascinated by World War II. It was the quintessential and uncomplicated battle between good and evil. You knew who the good guys were, and they won. What wasn't there to like? As I grew older, I began to understand the reasons why it started and when it started. There was a point when I asked myself, what was it like to live at the beginning of such a massive world war? I always wondered about that, what it was like to know that a world war was coming. Unfortunately, now I know. Rarely do we think about why wars start. We're too busy trying to provide for our families and their future to pause long enough to ask why we have fought so many wars. Yes, we have the reasons recorded in the history books and on the headlines of our newspapers, but those of you who have been reading my articles know that those reasons are half-truths at best. Now we go to war for those interchangeable commodities that we call money and power. On Thursday of the previous week in June of 2014, I wrote about the love of money being the cause of this horrifying rendezvous with destiny. Here's what Paul said to Timothy, quote, "For the love of money is the root of all evil, which, while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." Close quote. 1 Timothy 6:10. By the way, this brings an important question to my mind. Are you letting your love of the good life keep you from serving God or preparing for what is coming so that you can serve God? If you aren't serving God with 100% of every bit of effort in you, if you aren't doing the best that you can to get ready for what is coming so that you can keep serving God with every bit of effort in you, you need to ask yourself why. God certainly will when you see Him next. But let's get back to World War III. If the love of money and power is the root of all evil, then maybe, if we look hard enough, we'll see the money at the heart of this next world war. And we really don't need to look very hard at all. After World War II, the world economy was based on US dollars because the United States promised that every dollar would be convertible into gold on demand, unless you were a US citizen. This was all according to something called the Bretton Woods Agreement. Well, as you can imagine, the US government couldn't keep her hand out of the cookie jar and started abusing her position as head of the dollar empire. That put pressure on the agreement, so Nixon took us off of it on August 15th, 1971, to the shock and dismay of the rest of the world. Oops. In one fell swoop, all the world's currencies suddenly became fiat, without a single source of gold backing them. Let me quote Jerry Robinson of FTMdaily.com. President Richard Nixon and his globalist sidekick, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, knew that their destruction of the international gold standard under the Bretton Woods arrangement would cause a decline in the artificial global demand of the US dollar. Maintaining this artificial dollar demand was vital if the United States were to continue expanding its welfare and warfare spending, close quote. That is when they hit on the idea of the petrodollar, convincing the Saudis and the rest of OPEC to price their oil in US dollars only. When did that begin? 1973. 1973. What a curious year for the petrodollar system to begin. Why did they agree to do this in 1973? Could it be that Israel's success in defending herself in the 1973 Yom Kippur War frightened Saudi Arabia enough to finally agree to the U.S. terms for this agreement? Is this why Kissinger delayed 7 days before being forced by Nixon to agree to Israel's request for emergency support after the Yom Kippur War began? Yes, you might not know this, but Kissinger has repeatedly thrown Israel under the bus. In fact, he's on record as wanting Israel defeated by her Arab neighbors. And he has stated that Israel will no longer exist by 2022. It's hard to know what goes on in the corrupt mind of Henry or Hank Alfred Kissinger, but we do know that he engineered the success and continuation of the American empire by convincing the Saudis and then OPEC to do the following. The Saudis must agree to price all of their oil sales in US dollars only. In other words, the Saudis were to refuse all other currencies except the US dollar as payment for their oil exports. And then the Saudis would be open to investing their surplus oil proceeds in U.S. debt securities. In return, the U.S. agreed to give Arab members of OPEC as many weapons as they wanted and defend them from all threats, including from Israel. That last bit, being defended from any threat by Israel, was probably the final selling point, one that Kissinger was probably not expecting but more than willing to offer. By 1975, the petrodollar was a done deal. OPEC agreed that none of their members would sell any oil for anything except US dollars. And from that moment on, all US foreign policy would be directed at defending that agreement. It was a marriage made in hell. Now do you understand why the US invaded Iraq twice? For a pretty good and short discussion on the petrodollar system, watch a video called The Shocking Truth About the US Dollar, What the Media Never Told You. You'll find that in the description below the YouTube video. And for those of you who are listening to this via MP3, you might need to go to the YouTube video. Anyway, this is why the US has not been a friend of Israel and never will be. And I saw it for myself from Jerusalem. Now, the above video was recorded in 2010, before the war in Syria that was started by Saudi Arabia and Turkey in 2011 to stop the Iran-Iraq-Syria natural gas pipeline. Yes, you saw that right. The war in Syria was started by the Saudis and the Turks. Dirtbags, one and all. Can you now understand why the U.S. has been so intent on taking down the Assad government in Syria? The U.S. must keep their agreement with OPEC alive, or the American empire falls. And the Saudis aren't happy. Combine that thought with a fascinating quote that I picked up from an article on danielpipes.org. Quote, "When it comes to the Saudi-American relationship, the White House should be called the White Tent." Close quote. And that's from Mohammed al-Khilawi. My ability to pronounce Arabic names has been lost somewhere outside. Anyway, al-Khilawi, or Khilawi. Anyway, a Saudi diplomat who defected to the United States. So there is this interesting give and take relationship between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. Saudi Arabia can destroy the U.S. if America doesn't do what the Saudis want, and the U.S. can destroy Saudi Arabia if the Saudis don't do what America wants. Unfortunately, the Saudis are becoming increasingly unhappy with the U.S. They aren't getting a good rate of return on those treasury bonds that they've been required to buy, and they aren't happy with how slow America has been in granting their wishes. America has yet to attack either Iran or Syria, and that was 2014. A few things have happened in the intervening 4 years. And the Saudis have become increasingly nervous about Iran. Now, the U.S. has become war-weary and a little tired of Saudi games, and America has run smack dab into the Russians in Syria. And it was the threat of Russian reprisal that caused Obama to back down on his promised attack against the Assad regime in Syria in September of 2013. And it is Russia's entrance into this discussion that leads us to the threat of World War III. History will record that World War III began in 2011, when Turkey and Saudi Arabia created the uprising against Assad in Damascus. The only question is when this war goes nuclear. And then that was on Monday, June 23rd, 2014, and now we move to Tuesday, June 24th, 2014, and the article is Orders from Riyadh, Part 1, The Birth of the Petrodollar System. After I thought my way through yesterday's article, things have become a bit clearer. And this has allowed me to understand the morning news a little better. As I said yesterday, on Monday of June 23rd, 2014, if the petrodollar system falls, the American empire falls. This means that whoever controls petroleum controls the American empire. We invaded Iraq twice to preserve the petrodollar. We've been training and arming jihadis in Syria to preserve the petrodollar, and we seem awfully reluctant to do anything to ISIS because of the petrodollar. Oh, and we'll have a nuclear war because of the petrodollar. I almost forgot about that one. What an amazing set of circumstances. Because of the deal made back in 1973 between Nixon and Faisal bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, friends call him King, of Saudi Arabia, America's foreign policy has been captured by Islam. And I can't believe that I just said that. But it's true. The true leaders of Islam, the ruling family of Saudi Arabia, have America on a leash. If America doesn't do what the House of Saud tells them to do, well, they just have to hint at how great the Chinese yuan would be as the new petrocurrency, and America will salute and obey. And yes, the situation really is that bizarre. Let me take a moment to go over again why this is true, because I know that this is almost too incredible to believe, and I only believe it because I did the math. So let's do the math. At the beginning of World War II, everyone was afraid that Germany and Japan would win, so they shipped their gold to the safest place on the planet, America. Austria, France, Britain, China, and a bunch of other people sent their gold bullion to America for safekeeping. After World War II was over, America was the only country with all of her industrial capacity undamaged. So she became the manufacturing powerhouse of the world, and she had all the gold. Furthermore, the US dollar was still on the gold standard, so it was natural for all the major currencies of the world to put themselves on the gold standard by tying their currencies to the US dollar. It was just a logical thing to do. We call this the Bretton Woods Agreement. Oh, and since the Soviets were such a big threat, they left their gold in the US. All of this concentrated a tremendous amount of financial power in the hands of the US, and as Lord Acton wrote in 1887, quote, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men." Close quote. Well, like I said, America couldn't keep her hands out of the cookie jar and started to print more dollars than she had in gold. And that worked fine as long as the other nations of the world didn't figure this out. And they didn't, for about 20-something years. This allowed the US to build up a big military, a space program, and by votes, I mean invest in a welfare state. The fox was in charge of the hen house, and the chickens had no idea. Unfortunately for the US, the chickens, Britain, France, Germany, etc., started to figure out that the US wasn't playing fair. However, since the price of gold was set at $35 an ounce, the chickens decided to buy back their gold and get out of the hen house. The process started out as a trickle and then became a flood. All the dollars that the US government had been printing were starting to come home to roost, and the US Treasury was going to run out of gold. And that could not be allowed to happen. That's why Nixon took the US dollar off of the gold standard on August 15, 1971. That solved the problem about the declining gold reserves, but it was replaced by a much bigger one. How was America going to fund Lyndon Johnson's welfare state and the Cold War with the Soviet Union? Ouch! As Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger dithered over what to do about this problem, another situation was raising its ugly head: oil. During the late 1940s, America stopped being an exporter of oil and became a net importer. In the 1950s, 10% of all oil consumption was imported. In the 1960s, it was 18%. And then in 1970, U.S. production of crude oil peaked. American imports of oil were going to accelerate right at the time when the US dollar was going to get weaker and weaker. This meant that the might of the United States was going to weaken right at the height of the Cold War. It also meant that the rich and powerful in the US were going to be less rich and powerful, and we just couldn't have that. However, Henry Kissinger is one of the smartest psychopaths ever to hold political office in the US, and he figured out something that would fix all of America's problems, quote unquote, and ensure her hegemony for decades to come: the petrodollar system. We can't be certain when Henry approached King Faisal of Saudi Arabia with this idea, but Faisal was a smart dude and wouldn't have jumped on this without some serious thinking. Faisal also had some problems of his own. Saudi Arabia's finances were a mess, and she had a lot of oil wealth under the ground and no military power to protect it. He didn't like the communists, but he wasn't really impressed with the Americans either. Egypt had been his biggest military threat, but they'd been trounced by the Israelis, so you can imagine that he was taking a wait-and-see approach as he thought about Kissinger's offer. All of that takes time, which is why we don't know when the petrodollar idea was presented to the Saudis. Then came 1973. Israel won big and could have gone on to destroy Syria and Egypt. But Israel was stopped by the US, and that demonstrated America's leash on Israel and America's willingness to yank on it. That settled it for our boy Faisal. The US could be trusted to do what he wanted them to do, so he signed the Technical Cooperation Agreement on February 13, 1974. And that was the birth of the petrodollar. And that is also why the U.S. federal government has always been an enemy of Israel. But wait, why is all of that important? I'm glad you asked that, but I'm not done yet. So you need to understand a few things first. This petrodollar system meant that if you wanted to buy oil, you had to have US dollars to buy your oil. Why? Well, keep listening. This is where we go to Wednesday, June 25th, 2014, and it's Orders from Riyadh Part 2, Petrodollar Slavery. The impact of the petrodollar system is so utterly fantastic that it's hard to fit it all together in a way that makes sense. This is part of the reason why I've spent so much time on this subject. The other part of the problem is that I myself have been working my way through this puzzle, and writing about it has helped me see new aspects. You might say that I write these articles to wrestle with difficult ideas, and the petrodollar is one of the most important ideas that I've run into. So let's go wrestle with the petrodollar idea in part 2 of this series. Yesterday, Tuesday, June 23rd, 2014, we talked about how and why the petrodollar system started. It was the brainchild of one of the most diabolical men in U.S. history, Henry Kissinger, and his petrodollar idea rescued America from the consequences of the corruption of Lyndon Johnson and paved the way for America to become the greatest empire the world has ever known, making slaves of anyone who wanted oil. But I'm getting ahead of myself because I haven't shown you how this worked out so dramatically in America's favor. Remember the deal that America made with Saudi Arabia in 1973? And then OPEC in 1975, meant that no one in the world, no one, could buy oil in any currency except the US dollar if you didn't have oil. I'm sorry, and if you didn't have oil, you needed US dollars to buy it. Please keep that thought firmly in mind as we talk about how important oil is. You've heard me rant on and on about the importance of oil, how vital it is to the continued existence of our civilization, at least as it is organized now. So humor me as I talk a bit more about how important it is. When we get to the end of this discussion, you'll be blown away as the pieces come together for you. And no, you do not need to believe in peak oil to understand the significance of what I am talking about. Although, frankly, you need to believe in peak oil because it's reality, just as real as gravity. But I digress. I know of no better discussion on the importance of oil than this video. It's a video titled "There's No Tomorrow: Peak Oil, Energy Growth in the Future." And it's a YouTube that I have placed down below in the comment section of this video. That video is a masterpiece in describing just how vital oil is to our society. Other films and videos might be more thorough or comprehensive, but none communicate the fundamental facts and ideas better than this one in such a short amount of time. And I think, and like I said, you do not need to agree with the peak oil conclusion to understand the film's point about how important oil is. But you will forgive me if I question your sanity in refusing to see the obvious. Now, to put the importance of oil in an even broader perspective, just take a look at this picture. And it's, again, in the comment section below, and it's an image that is titled "A Brief History of Oil and Humans." And when you look at the graph, and I'm describing it to you in audio, but you'll have to look at it for yourself, the growth in human population over just a few hundred years, a couple hundred years actually, is utterly fantastic. And when you look at the growth in oil consumption and production, you see that it corresponds exactly with the growth in human population. I think when you look at that graph and that image, it's hard to believe that there's not a connection. Now, going on with what I said or wrote, you can argue all you want about all the other factors that led to the current size of the human population, but you cannot argue with the fact that oil is the chief cause. Everything else is just detail. So, to make the understatement of the year, oil is important. Now, according to agweb.com, the average U.S. farmer feeds 155 people. But that wasn't always the case. In 1940, one farmer could feed 19 people. More than a century ago, one farmer fed 2.5. The difference? Oil. Without oil, a farmer cannot produce enough food to support all the factory workers, teachers, engineers, scientists, judges, policemen, garbage collectors, sewage workers, physicians, hospital administrators, daycare workers, filmmakers, programmers, librarians, writers, especially writers, construction workers, soldiers, pilots, truck drivers, sailors, plumbers, newscasters, and anyone else that I missed. Without oil, all those people, at least 90%, need to become farmers. That's right. Without oil, we go back to what life was like back in the 1790s when 90% of the population were farmers. Although a nation of clever farmers might be able to produce enough food so that only a little over 50% of the nation were farmers, like it was in the 1870s. By then, the first farm tractor had already been produced, and in 1901, we had the first commercially successful lightweight petrol-powered general-purpose tractor. Say that 9 times. And once that happened, it was all over. Oil was here to stay. Oil-powered tractors gave farmers a decisive advantage over farmers without them. From that point on, a nation without oil could not compete with a nation that had it, because everyone needs to eat. Everyone. So you got it. Oil is important. No, vital if a country wants to prosper. Fast forward to 1901 to the 1970s and the petrodollar system. This petrodollar system meant that if you wanted to buy oil to fuel farm tractors and anything else, you had to have US dollars to buy your oil. Why? Because Henry Kissinger convinced the Saudis in 1973 and then OPEC in 1975 to only accept US dollars for their oil. No other currency would be allowed. If you didn't have dollars, you didn't get oil. And if you wanted dollars, there was only one place that you could go to get them: the United States of America. Okay, so all you have to do to get US dollars is go and ask for them, right? No. If you want US dollars from America, you've got to offer Americans something that they want at a price that they like. If Americans don't like what you have, you don't get US dollars. Well, how about the foreign exchange markets? That's just the same thing, except this time you have to go to another country that has been selling stuff to America and get them to cough up their dollars. And they won't do that unless you offer to give them something that they want more than oil, since they are using those dollars to buy oil. All of this means that you have to be really clever and work really hard if you want your farmers to produce more food. Farm tractors need food, fuel. If you want more workers for your factories so that they can make things that Americans want. If you want better education so that your workers can make better stuff that Americans want. If you want good health care so that your workers can keep making stuff that Americans want. I think you get the picture. From the moment of the birth of the petrodollar, if you didn't please America, you didn't get oil. And that meant you stayed an underdeveloped country. Why do I say that you stayed underdeveloped? Without oil to power tractors, your farms produce only enough food to feed the farmer and just 2 or 3 other people. And that means that you have a highly agrarian society without sophisticated healthcare, education, or manufacturing. Really, it's as simple as that. Track the progress of technological development and you will find that it closely follows the agricultural yield curve. Or maybe I should put it another way. Everyone needs to eat especially scientists, engineers, and doctors. Now, my lovely wife ambushed me today, 4 years ago, with a rather thorny question. Quote, Mrs. Little, "No one is going to understand all that if they aren't a currency trader." Close quote. She just looked at me. Why did I have to marry such a smart woman? So, let's try to work our way through an example of how this works. And since I live in Taiwan, and since Taiwan has essentially no crude oil reserves, let's use Taiwan. Taiwan buys a little over 400 million barrels of oil a year. The price of oil is about $106 a barrel at that time. That was a lot. Okay, actually interesting now that I'm thinking about it. 2014, $106 a barrel. Woohoo! Okay. We're getting back there. Okay, which means that Taiwan needs $42.4 billion, and it means to buy that oil. Taiwan has a population of about 23.34 million people. This means that each and every man, woman, and child needs to come up with $1,816.62 each. Now, that's a lot of money for the average citizen of Taiwan, but you have to do what you have to do. So, that would mean about new Taiwan dollars 54,000 NT, 54.5 thousand NT. But wait, Americans don't want new Taiwan dollars. What, really? Yes, really. Americans can't buy anything with new Taiwan dollars. They can't buy eggs, milk, or steak with the currency of Taiwan. Remember that the Arabs won't give you oil if you don't give them US dollars. So what are the Taiwanese going to do? Hey, maybe the Japanese would give Taiwan some US dollars. A lot of Japanese come here for visits and... Wait, why are you giving me that look again? Let me repeat this again. The Arabs only take US dollars. The Japanese have the same problem that the Taiwanese do. They need to get their US dollars from the only people who print them, the US. Oh. So, how do you get dollars from the US? You sell them stuff. And right now, America likes electrical machinery made by Taiwan. Doesn't America make electrical machinery? Of course, but remember that Taiwan needs dollars to buy oil, so the Taiwanese work really, really hard to make the best and cheapest machinery that they can so that they can sell it to the US and get dollars. To get an idea of what that means, per capita GDP for Taiwan is just 20.9 thousand US dollars, while for America it's 53.1 thousand US dollars. The average American, even now, makes more than 2.5 times more money than the average Taiwanese. Or maybe I should put it this way. The average Taiwanese is 2.5 times poorer than the average American, partly because Taiwan must get as many US dollars as she can so that she can buy oil. And yes, I can personally tell you that the Taiwanese are much, much poorer than the average American and work absolutely insane hours for what little money they get. Are you starting to see how America has enslaved the world? It has more powerfully than any other empire has ever enslaved the world. The petrodollar shackles that America put on the world are truly amazing. But there's something else that happened as a result of this fantastic petrodollar system. As you think about the need for the world to manufacture stuff to get US dollars to buy oil, could this explain why all the manufacturing jobs in America left the United States? The only way that any country in the world was going to get any US dollars to buy any oil was to take manufacturing jobs away from Americans. So, if you want to blame someone for the hollowing out of the US manufacturing sector, the one to blame is Henry Kissinger. But wait, there's more. Henry was very, very clever in how this diabolical agreement was set up. So, you do not want to miss the next installment of this series, and yes, all of this will be leading up to those orders from Riyadh. which is the capital of Saudi Arabia, that will lead us straight to nuclear war. So, I think this is Thursday, June 26, 2014, Orders from Riyadh, Part 3, the Petrodollar Debt and Death System. I'm still amazed at this petrodollar system. The more I look at it, the more I realize how it has shaped the world over the last 40 years. One brilliant psychopath had an idea and made everyone in the world slaves to the U.S. Federal Reserve. Wow. That psychopath was Henry Alfred Kissinger. And he incorporated yet another brilliant idea into his system that has kept the American empire alive far longer than anyone could have imagined. In fact, I believe that it is this second element that is the sole reason why so many of us have been wrong in our predictions of the death of the dollar. I call it the petrodollar debt and death system. So let's review a little bit. In the first part of this series, we talked about how and why the petrodollar system got started. And remember, we got started thinking about this, or I should say I got started thinking about this, by looking into Syria. The world sent their gold to the U.S. and trusted America to not abuse their position as king of the world financial system. Unfortunately, America abused the privilege, especially under Lyndon Johnson, who was such a dirtbag. And that forced Nixon to take the U.S. and the world off of the gold standard. This meant that the dollar was going to fail. So Kissinger convinced Saudi Arabia and then OPEC to accept only U.S. dollars for their oil. And that gave birth to the petrodollar system. And then in part 2, it also enslaved the world to the U.S., as we talked about in part 2 yesterday, or 4 years ago yesterday. Oil was the key to development, so if you didn't have any, and most didn't, you had to get U.S. dollars, and there was only one way to get U.S. dollars: convince Americans to give them to you. Of course, Americans wanted something for their dollars, and that meant that everyone in the world had to work really, 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 really hard to make something good enough and cheap enough so that Americans would buy them instead of from one of their own made-in-American companies. This killed the manufacturing sector in the U.S. because it is extremely difficult to compete with starving foreigners willing to work long hours for low pay to get oil, so they can eat and send their kids to a good school. And if you don't believe me, come visit us here in Taiwan. All of this means that you and I are the world's biggest slave masters, at least those of you that are American. The fact that no one understood the shackles that we put on them, well, that was just icing on the cake. A really nice kind made with cream cheese. But there's one extra bit that was positively brilliant. This petrodollar system required the Saudis and OPEC to buy treasury bonds. When I saw this on Jerry Robinson's website, ftmdaily.com, quote, "Second, the excess profits of the oil-producing nations are then placed into U.S. government debt securities held in Western banks," close quote, I was in awe. Wow. Jerry went on to describe the implications. It increased the global demand for U.S. dollars. It increased global demand for U.S. debt securities, bonds and treasuries. It gives the United States the ability to buy oil with a currency it can print at will, as much as it wants. You and I have already figured out the increased global demand for U.S. dollars. That was already a brilliant move. That reason. But the increased global demand for U.S. Treasury bonds, well, now that was really brilliant. This meant that the U.S. government could go into as much debt as she wanted and not worry about the repercussions. Isn't that amazing? It was as if a money spigot had been installed in the sky and turned on, and it rained money on all of us. Or more specifically, Washington, D.C., and then on all of us. The problem is that we abused the privilege, just like we did under Lyndon Johnson. and every other president afterwards. Even though Kissinger had installed a money spigot, a money faucet in the sky, there were still limits, and we went beyond them. But we'll get to that later, because there's something else that we need to get to. You see, not only could we borrow as much as we wanted, we could also print as much as we wanted. We could print all the dollars that we wanted to buy our own oil. And we could print as many dollars as it took to buy all the foreign-made stuff that we wanted, so that those foreigners could buy their own oil, too. Think of OPEC oil production as just one massive wealth printing machine. A wealth printing machine that would never blow up on you. Of course, never is a long time, and we ran out of never. Even fabulous and massive wealth printing machines start to wear out when you push them too hard, and that's what happened. But we'll also get to that a little later. The world was caught in this incredible bind. If you wanted to develop into an educated, prosperous society with advanced healthcare, you needed to work twice as hard as Americans so that you could make stuff more cheaply than the stuff that Americans were already making. And if you had a neighboring country who didn't like you very much, like, well, say Taiwan, well, you had an even greater need to develop, because a good military just isn't possible without a good economy. Why? Weapons are very expensive, and the really good weapons are American. So if you want the best, you gotta go American. And Americans only accept, you guessed it, US dollars. And if you fall off the US dollar treadmill, guess what happens? You get eaten by your neighbor. Also, since the US is 10 times bigger and 100 times stronger than Saudi Arabia and OPEC, America really didn't have much to fear from her petrodollar partners. Except, well, have you ever wondered why Islam has become a protected entity in America? Or why Obama went to the Muslim world immediately after his first election? Interesting questions. Well, I think I'm about to answer them for you. Yes, the Muslim oil sheikhs weren't stupid. They knew that the only way to keep themselves from being eaten by the U.S. was to work on changing America from within. And this petrodollar system gave them the money to work on changing America. Could this be why Obama has a, quote, wedding ring, unquote, that says there is no God except Allah on it? Could this be why he's been wearing that ring since the 1980s in Harvard before he was married? Could this be due to the fact that he had a mysterious benefactor that put him through university? Could this benefactor be Saudi? From Saudi Arabia? It might explain the picture that we saw of Obama bowing before the king of Saudi Arabia. And then there's the picture of Obama in Muslim dress. And then there's the picture of Obama who might be saying the Shahada, which is what you say when you are a Muslim or become a Muslim. It may also be why the Saudis supported a man who was registered as a Muslim when he lived in Indonesia, Obama, and under Islam, once a Muslim, always a Muslim. Now, does all of this mean that Obama is a Muslim with allegiance to the king of Saudi Arabia? Not necessarily, but the theory uncomfortably fits many of the facts. And if I were the Saudis and worried that their quote-unquote partner, the United States, could steamroll them at any moment they wanted to, well, I'd do my very best to have a U.S. president who was one of theirs. Hey, that's what I would do if I were ruling Saudi Arabia and had trillions of dollars flowing through my hands. I leave this for you to decide. There could be even deeper waters here that you and I cannot see. Although, all will be seen eventually. But let's get back to the petrodollar system. We figured out the debt angle. So let's talk about war and death. Let's talk about some of the wars fought because of the petrodollar system. You see, the petrodollar system is why Saddam Hussein was put in power by the CIA in July of 1979. The petrodollar system is why Iraq fought the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988. The petrodollar system is the reason why the U.S. kicked Iraq out of Kuwait in 1990. The petrodollar system is why 500,000 children died in Iraq during the sanctions against Iraq. The petrodollar system is why Arab agitators always had the money and support to stir up the Palestinians against the Israelis. The petrodollar system is the reason why the Second Chechen War was fought between 1999 and 2000. The petrodollar system is the reason why the U.S. would say nothing to the fact that so many Saudis were hijackers in 9/11, and why Saudi diplomats and the Saudi intelligence service provided logistics and support for the 9/11 terrorists. The petrodollar system was the reason why there was an attempted coup against Hugo Chavez in Venezuela in 2002. The petrodollar system is the reason why the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003. The petrodollar system is the reason why the Syrian uprising began so conveniently in 2011. The petrodollar system is the reason why the U.S. overthrew and then assassinated Muammar Gaddafi of Libya in 2011. The petrodollar system is the reason why the U.S. has been training and arming insurgents in Syria since 2012. The petrodollar system is the reason why the U.S. tried to find a way to attack Syria in 2013, but ultimately failed. The petrodollar system is the reason why the U.S. has been reluctant to attack ISIS in Iraq. The petrodollar system is the reason why the U.S. planned or plans to attack Iran, but can't quite figure out how. And that's what I can think of off the top of my head. That is a lot of war to defend the petrodollar system, and it's one of the reasons why no one dares to price any oil they might have in anything but U.S. dollars, even if you are Russia, at least until recently. That is why the petrodollar is about debt and death. When you start to understand all of this, you start to get the idea why so much has happened that was so awful. It has been the biggest cash cow in the history of the world. Nothing has concentrated more wealth in the hands of so few so quickly than the petrodollar system. Nothing. Is it any wonder that Kissinger is considered the CEO of the Illuminati? He is the one that has handed the Illuminati more wealth than anyone else in more than 200 years of their official history. It is a truly awe-inspiring triumph of corruption. But the system is starting to crack. There was too much corruption for too long. It has eaten away at the foundations of the petrodollar system. Furthermore, OPEC oil production has stopped growing and begun to fall. In fact, conventional crude oil production everywhere in the world has begun to fall. And that has changed the dynamics of the petrodollar system. America's need to protect the petrodollar system has made her more and more vulnerable to the needs and demands of the Saudis and OPEC. And this has brought the United States into a collision course with a revitalized Russia. And that brings us to the orders from Riyadh that will lead us to nuclear war. A nuclear war that we will talk about next. And it'll be orders from Riyadh, part 4. It was a Friday in June 2014. When Saudi Arabia and OPEC became the paymasters for the American empire, the Arabs were fairly unsophisticated in the game of world power. That has changed. Now the sheikhs are getting better at handling the leash and the lash, which is why it is easier to see Arab machinations behind the wars in the Middle East. There's also another problem. The profit margins for the Saudi sheikhs have exploded, and that has given them even more power. Unfortunately, with great power comes the opportunity to miscalculate and destroy everything. And that's why we are being led by the nose to nuclear war. those Saudis are no great shakes. Sorry, I couldn't resist. If you are with me so far, you've learned about why and how the petrodollar system got started. It began with Orders from Riyadh Part 1, the birth of the petrodollar system. And then you learned about how fantastic it was for the American empire and how it enslaved the world in Orders from Riyadh Part 2, petrodollar slavery. And then yesterday, you got a chance to see how it became a debt and death system in Orders from Riyadh Part 3, the petrodollar debt and death system. Now we get to see how it will destroy us in one final cataclysm. Please remember that the price of oil is determined on the margins, not at the core, especially when you have a constrained resource like oil. So when the demand for oil goes up, other, more expensive oil comes online and drives up the price of oil sharply. The cost of producing oil for core producers like Saudi Arabia will not necessarily have gone up by much, and that means huge profits for low-cost producers like the Saudis. Huge profits. And money means power. The power to settle a few scores and rework the Middle East according to how they see things. Also, at the same time, far-sighted oligarchs in Russia had taken over the oil and natural gas industries, and the money started flowing in. That money brought with it dreams of a new Russian empire and an obliteration of Russian shame at the fall of the Soviet Union. This revitalized Russia could afford better weapons and better training, especially since they had reduced the size of their military. They also started reaching out to those who were concerned by America's aggressive power. The Russians started building pipelines and doing deals. China, Iran, and Germany made deals. Syria and Iraq made deals. Lots of people welcomed Russian deals. Saudi Arabia was never happy with Russia and began funding Chechen rebels in the south of Russia. This led to the Second Chechen War and was a huge problem for Russia, which was neutralized somewhat with a victory by the Russians in May of 2000. I was appalled at the Saudis for openly admitting their involvement in that Chechen War. If the Russians weren't deadly enemies of the Saudis then, they are now. Then came the pipeline deal that Russia was trying to make happen. That pipeline, the Iran-Iraq-Syria pipeline, was going to bring natural gas from Iran to a port in Syria where it would be shipped to Europe. Iran was going to make money on this deal, and Russia was going to make money on this deal. Syria was going to make money. The Shiites in Iraq were going to make money. The Saudis liked none of that. They didn't like any of it, especially since Iran was a deadly threat to Saudi Arabia. So as the deal was coming closer to being finished, Saudi Arabia and Turkey launched an uprising in Syria. That killed the pipeline deal. And it also painted an even bigger Russian bullseye on Saudi Arabia. Furthermore, Israel had discovered natural gas under the Mediterranean Sea, and that wasn't making Russia very happy either. Add to this the fact that Qatar would like to run a pipeline out to the Mediterranean itself, so that they could sell natural gas to Europe too. But for that to happen, Syria needed to be taken down because Syria is run by Shiite clerics, and Qatar is Sunni. Oh, and if Syria is taken down, there goes Russia's only serious naval port in the Mediterranean. That would also mean Russia would lose their only real toehold in the Middle East. Russia has repeatedly warned that nuclear war would come if her interests in Syria are being threatened, but very few have been taking any of that seriously. Now, just as Saudi profits have been exploding and America's finances have been doing the opposite, this has radically changed the dynamics of the relationship between the U.S. and OPEC. The Saudis have gotten a bigger say in what goes on in the U.S., and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that the head of the CIA, John Brennan, by the way, the same John Brennan who is acting and is a complete dirtbag, just saying, John Brennan is a convert to Islam. And the head of the CIA? Wait a minute. Who was it that staged that coup in Ukraine? Right. The CIA with the U.S. State Department. That coup in Ukraine is a massive threat to Russia. As I described in my article, Ukraine Cannot Escape Russia, the Carpathians. Russia cannot allow Ukraine to fall into the hands of the West. They consider that to be a massive existential threat. They always have, and they always will. And let's not forget America's involvement in the Russo-Georgian War in 2008. You can bet that the Russians haven't forgotten. Then there's this fascinating bit of talk making the rounds of power in Washington, D.C. Idiots are talking about how they could win a nuclear war with Russia because of America's wonderful anti-missile defenses. And you can bet that the Russians have been hearing this talk. Let me add something else about Russia. Russian society and Russian thinking has been shaped by a history of extreme vulnerability. Their history is one of either being under attack or the threat of being under attack. This means that Russia takes a bigger view of threats than you or I would. And yes, I understand why you would disagree, because I used to too. But that was before I saw how Russian history has shaped Russia. All of that and more are pieces in a catastrophic puzzle. So now let me put the pieces together for you. In one piece we have Russia that feels under attack. They feel like the United States and her OPEC paymasters are threatening her existence. And yes, that's exactly how they feel. Furthermore, Russia cannot win a conventional war with the US or NATO, which is why her nuclear weapons are the most modern in the world. And then we have the Saudis and other oil-rich Arabs attempting to reshape the Middle East and are yanking on the leash that they have on America to do their bidding. Unfortunately, these Arabs have been overconfident and have directly threatened the existence of Russia. Can you believe that the head of Saudi intelligence stuck a finger in Putin's face? This is amazing. You never do that. Then we have the United States that is desperate to keep the petrodollar system going because it would mean the end of the American empire. There is no way that the U.S. would ever allow that system to end. It would destroy everything. Couple that thinking with a belief that America could emerge from a nuclear war unscathed, which is stupid thinking. Well, this means that we have a problem. If the Saudis believe that America can win a nuclear war, you can bet that the Saudis will be pushing for a nuclear war. Furthermore, they have become overconfident as they play with fire. Then, if the threat to the petrodollar system gets too large, and if America feels like she can win a nuclear war, you can bet that there will be a massive push for a nuclear war. The drumbeat for this war will increase as the American economy declines. And then, if the Russians believe that the threat of a nuclear war is big enough, they will shoot first, because they know that this is the only way that they can survive. And they have specifically developed nuclear missiles that can avoid being shot down by American anti-missile defenses. So here's the question. Will there be an American war? I believe that it's unavoidable, unless America's military power can be neutralized quickly enough. I believe that it is possible for America to be neutralized, but it is a slim possibility, very slim. Furthermore, the very fact of neutralizing American power might touch off the very nuclear war that Russia and China would like to avoid. So I'm not sure how to avoid a nuclear war. And let's not forget that many good men and women of God have received dreams and visions of nuclear war, and it is hard to discount those, very hard. As far as I'm concerned, nuclear war is inescapable. There are too many psychopaths with too much power making too many miscalculations, and a nuclear war would be the only solution to these evil fools. This means that this nuclear war will ultimately come, whether directly or indirectly, at the orders from Riyadh. Okay, that was a lot. So let me pull you back to today, 4 years later, in 2018. The one difference between now and then is the rise of Iran as a threat to Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Gulf Arabs. Iran has always been a threat, but it was always something on the back burner. Serious, but something that did not seem to be so imminent. Well, that changed Wednesday morning when the Houthis, using Iranian weapons, attacked 2 Saudi tankers going through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Neither of the tankers were sunk, and only one was damaged. But that attack has put us on the brink of war, and no one is talking about that connection. As far as I know, I'm the only one that's mentioning the connection. In fact, the U.S. cannot afford to mention that there is a connection. And if you read the 4-part series above and listened, and if you heard what I said, you'll understand why no American official can mention this connection, if they even know about it. And I am curious about who will and will not mention this connection. You can bet that no organization that is closely tied to the U.S. government will ever mention this connection. In fact, I suspect that the, quote, defense of Israel, unquote, will be used as a pretext for any attack, or maybe some other existential threat to America. But the reason, the only reason, for war with Iran will be for the protection of the petrodollar system. Of course, Iran knows this, so it should not have been a surprise to us that Iran would threaten Saudi oil shipments, since their own oil production is being threatened with sanctions starting in November. In really just a few months, America is going to try to turn off all those profits that Iran has been getting from their sales of oil. Will Iran back down from their threat against oil shipping through the Bab el-Mandeb? Will America back down on some of those threats of sanctions? Will America jump into the war in Yemen to keep Saudi oil flowing? Or will the insanity keep ratcheting up until bombs start falling? Pay attention to all of this. At the moment, this sits in the category of rumors of war. But we could very quickly move into a shooting war, and Iran plays dirty, very, very dirty. You going to be ready for this?